now I'd like to welcome to the programme the Ombudsman, Gerard Dealing. So thanks very much for coming on the programme, Ombudsman.
Thanks very much, Patrick. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, I suppose everyone has heard of the Ombudsman, but just would everyone have a general idea what the Ombudsman does? But maybe just give a little quick rundown on what exactly our functions are.
Okay, well, what we do is we seek to resolve complaints against public service providers where a person isn't able to resolve the complaint themselves. So if somebody has a problem with their local authority, their local council, or indeed with a department, whether that be the Department of Social Welfare or any public body that's providing a public service, we ask them to go first to that body and make the complaint to the body concerned. If they're not satisfied with the outcome that they get from there, they can come to us then and make a complaint. And we'll, in the first instance, we'll actually seek to try and resolve the complaint. In other words, to get the person what it is they were seeking in the first place. But if we can't manage that in an informal way, we will then carry out an investigation and make a recommendation if we believe there is something that the public body should do.
Yeah. So, and each public body has an inquiry officer of its own, doesn't it? Who's supposed to look after complaints.
Each public body should have a complaints process and somebody to contact. Now, they also separately, for people with disabilities, they should all have access officers. And this is very important, that because it may be that somebody might need a little bit of additional assistance to actually make their complaint or to deal with the person. So if that is the case, it might be a good idea to go through the access officer of the public body to make the complaint.
Yeah, and I think it's 6 weeks, is it, before, like if hasn't been a satisfactory response after 6 weeks?
Yeah, we don't, in that regard, while we have a time limit that they must make the complaint to us within a year, that will be after the body has dealt with it. You know, it depends on the various different organisations, but we wouldn't stick rigidly to those time scales. You know, if somebody has a legitimate complaint and they're slightly outside that time, that's something we can consider.
Yeah, and you have particular functions under the Disability Act, don't you?
We have. We can deal with complaints against public bodies in relation to access or indeed lack of access to public services. Now, that can range, Patrick, from, say, physical access if the person is having difficulty getting into a public building, but it most importantly also includes other types of access. You know, for example, I remember coming across a situation where somebody needed interpretation, and they had lined up their interpreter and they had booked a call at a certain time with the public body so that they would have the interpreter, but in fact the call ran out of time, you know, and it wasn't done within the slot. So that's where access officers come in and should really arrange to have the call done or the meeting held in a way that actually works for the person with a disability, so that if they have additional needs, that can be taken into account.
All right, that wouldn't immediately occur to one, you know, maybe somebody's visually impaired or hearing impaired, trying to get access to a body.
One example of, under the Disability Act that we dealt with, for example, was somebody who attended an election count, and they told the local authority or the returning officer in advance that they would actually be attending the count and that they needed sign language, Irish Sign Language, ISL.
Right.
The local authority, for whatever reason at the time, decided that they didn't need to do that. When we came to investigate the complaint, they said that there were screens up and there were signs, but those weren't sufficient and they didn't work for the person. Now, unfortunately, that event was over by the time the complaint was made to us, but the local authority accepted that they should have done it, and they said in future, if they are requested to provide ISL interpreters, they will actually do that. So we try to work to get things corrected for other people as well, not just for the person making the complaint. It's really all about creating awareness and getting a commitment from public bodies to do right and do better.
Right. And if the person themselves is not in a position to follow through in the complaint, they can nominate a specified person, can't they? You know?
They can, yeah. As you can imagine, we will deal with one particular person, but certainly if a person would rather that somebody else would make the complaint, we just seek the permission of the person who is the complainant, because obviously there may be confidential information being passed over and back in an investigation. So we need to be sure that we have the consent of the person with the disability for somebody else to act on their behalf.
Yeah, and then they have to go through a process like there's various means of contacting the office, isn't it, by writing or
Absolutely.
email?
I mean, we welcome contact anyway. Most people, or a lot of people nowadays, online suits them best, and they can contact us at ombudsman.ie. But we also are always satisfied to deal with phone calls as well, because we understand that for some people that's the best way. And I might just give you the number that people can contact us on. It's 01639 5600. So that's 01639 5600. And we will work with people to facilitate them in whatever way they want to talk to us or communicate with us.
And there's various documentation, isn't there, that they have to document a record of the procedure they've gone through with the body.
Yeah, but it's not overly onerous. I mean, in the first instance, we really just asked them what happened and what was the issue and what would resolve the complaint for them. And particularly at the early stage where we're trying to resolve the complaint in an informal way, it really is about trying to find a solution. Now, if we have to go to the investigation mode, then we will look for whatever documents or support that the person has for what has happened. But we'll also seek the documentation from the public body. So it's a very informal process. It's not. I know the word investigation might make it sound very technical or formal, but it isn't.
So the public body has to go through a certain procedure as well. The inquiry officer would be the main.
Oh yeah, we will contact the public body and we will ask them for all records in relation to whatever the complaint is about. And
the inquiry officer would provide a report, would they, of the contact they had with the person?
Usually, anyway, the first kind of port of call is people will have some communication from the public body in response to their complaint. Usually they'll have a response letter or an email saying, we've dealt with your complaint and we uphold it or we don't uphold it, or we're taking action or we're not taking action. So that's the first I suppose the first step in the process. But then we would ask for more detail from the public authority as to how they considered the complaint and why they took whatever action they took in the long run.
Right, and obviously confidentiality would be a big factor, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. People can supply material or information to us with the utmost confidence. Nobody would be aware of it. And equally, we don't share, in some of these formal processes, documents have to be shared between the parties. We don't do that necessarily. So if people want to give us information in confidence, we can deal with that and it won't be shared with anybody.
Is there any specific issue that arises more than others?
Well, because we have such a broad remit, people with disabilities have the same issues that other people have, if I could put it that way. For example, we deal with complaints against social protection, and one that comes to mind, for example, was where a couple who were both in receipt of disability allowance went abroad to have a treatment for a child, and for some reason one of them had their benefit cut and the other person didn't, because the other person, it was accepted that they had to travel with the child, but they both had to travel with the child. We intervened in that case, and there was a significant amount of money, I think it was $3,500, that the department was seeking to claim back from the people concerned. And when the department listened to the story and heard what we had to say, they actually withdrew the request there from that person. Another case would relate again to the Department of Social Welfare, and it was around a disability. In fact, the person was firstly in receipt of carer's allowance, and they claimed that for longer than they should have, and then the department sought back the money, and it was a considerable amount of money. It was, I think, around $15,000 that was actually owed back to the department. But it transpired when we started to investigate it that actually the person should have really transferred from the carer's allowance to an actual disability allowance, which turned out that they were due something like €13,000. So the net difference there was only about €2,000. It is, my point being that people, as I've said already, with disabilities have to deal with the same situations. Maybe sometimes there are additional challenges for them, but the actual kernel of the issue is very often the same. Apart from access, of course, access is very often a problem, and I think it's critically important that public bodies put themselves in the place of the person who's using their service, and don't design the services from the inside out. Take into account the needs of people, including people with disabilities, and that they may have additional needs that need to be catered for.
Yeah, transport is an issue, isn't it? Like, like lifts and stations being out of order for weeks on end. That's an issue that keeps coming up on this program.
It's difficult to believe that in this day and age somebody would have to contact a train company in advance and explain that I want to go from Dublin to Bray, and I'll be on the train that arrives at a certain time, and then there's somebody there to put down the ramp, and that's, as you say, even when it's working. That's when the system is working. It is unacceptable. This is an area actually that the Ombudsman's office and my predecessors, both the last two Ombudsmen, have done an extraordinary amount of work and produced quite a number of reports. And even we produced a report called Grounded in 2021, and if anybody wants to kind of, rather than wade through all the other reports, if they look at Grounded, it's on our website, ombudsman.ie, in relation to transport. And really, it is completely unacceptable, the situation that we're in now. What happened was the Ombudsman pointed out as far back as 10 years ago that a number of the schemes were not fit for purpose. Now, the intention of the Ombudsman at the time was that the schemes would actually be improved. But in fact, two of the schemes were actually discontinued. And the one scheme that remained, which is the one that assists people to purchase their own car, the criteria that were set out in the scheme were way too restrictive. It narrowed the number of people who could use it very significantly. So it meant a lot of people who had serious mobility issues couldn't actually qualify for the scheme. And we've been calling for the last 10 years, and I, no later than this week again, brought this to the attention of politicians, that this can't continue. It cannot be that we continue to treat people with disabilities in the way we're treating them, and that we do not facilitate them, whether that's public transport or private transport, because public transport doesn't work for everybody, as we know. Whether you're, particularly if you're in a rural area, but even in an urban area, you may be that extra mile. How do you get to the train station in the first place? So, it's not all about public transport, but we need to improve our public transport, and the government needs to immediately bring in a scheme for people with disabilities to assist them in relation to transport.
Yeah, another issue that keeps coming up is personal assistance. That there's a big kind of crisis going on there. There seems to be a great shortage of PAs, and there seem to be cutbacks and all that.
Yeah. Now, when we receive a complaint in an area like that, it very often is that a person is having difficulty accessing the service of a personal assistant. There are limitations on what we can do. In a situation like that, we will actually look at how the person was treated, how their complaint was dealt with, how their application was dealt with. But unfortunately, when it comes to the issue of resources, while we will look at how a person was treated, their application for access to the scheme was treated, if the actual resource is not there, if the scheme doesn't provide for it, or if the resources to provide the service aren't there, then we're limited in what we can do at that stage, because we can't find resources for that public body to ensure that they provide the service. So there are some limitations in that regard.
Right. And another issue is people in nursing, people, younger people being in nursing homes with older people, not a very suitable place for them to stay.
Correct. Again, my predecessor, Peter Tyndall, actually did a report on that in 2021, and it came from a number of complaints that the office had received from individuals who were living in nursing homes. And firstly, to point out, like, some people are in nursing homes and they're very happy and it works for them, and that's fine. But what we're looking for, and what should be there, is the choice. And as you say, a younger person, it may not be the proper setting for them. And also there's a whole move away, rightly, from congregated settings. So what people often want is their own front door. But the problem is they need the services in the community to support them to live in that situation. So there's two things here. One is getting the agreement that the person has somewhere to go, but also ensuring that there's a package of support around that person so that they can actually live and function fully in the community. And in fact, people don't necessarily know that the title of our report, Wasted Lives, which is quite emotive when you think about it, came from one of the residents who said that he had wasted most of his life in a nursing home when he really could be in the community if the support was there for him.
Right, yeah, because there's a man who comes in here that we interviewed a few times, and when I think he's in his late 30s now, but for most of his teenage years and so on, he was in a nursing home.
Yeah, it's not the ideal environment for some people, particularly if they would rather be out and living the fullest life they can in the community.
Yeah, and access.
I should just say, sorry,
sure, no
I should say that unlike the report on transport, we did get a positive response in relation to wasted lives. We did get a commitment from the HSE. They have moved, and albeit a small number of people, out of nursing homes. So I need to acknowledge that the HSE in that regard are doing work in that area, and the commitment is actually to find a way for people in nursing homes who shouldn't be there to be elsewhere. It's not happening as quick as we'd like it, but at least there is an acceptance that it should happen and a commitment to make it happen.
And what about access to public buildings? That's still an ongoing issue even now, isn't it?
It is an ongoing issue, and I think it's an issue where people, again, there's a kind of a lack of understanding and a lack of awareness sometimes among people who don't need the additional access, we'll say, as to how important it is. I've come across buildings where people say, but we'll help people if they call us, but people shouldn't have to. Like, as I said with the trains earlier, a person with a disability, whatever that disability is, should be able to access a building or a service the same as anybody else is able to access. So it's not acceptable to have to ring up and make special arrangements to get into a building. The building should be accessible when the person arrives. Yeah,
because it's not just a wheelchair ramp. If they're able to put in a wheelchair and say, okay, it's accessible. Obviously, what's inside the building is important too, isn't it?
Absolutely, and toilets and all sorts of other facilities should be there for people. And again, you pointed out at the start, and it's important to remind people that I do have a function under the disability legislation that if people have a difficulty with access to a public building or a public service, they can make a complaint to us and we will investigate it.
And you have outreach services as well, don't you? You go around the different areas.
We do. We have outreach now. Like everybody, the pandemic would have interfered with it and things slowed down, but we're moving back into it now, and our plan is to go into certain citizens information centres so that we're available to meet people. We're also holding workshops with people with disabilities and with say housing and areas like that. So really what we're doing is listening to people, and we're also going to move to different parts of the country where we would actually provide information and awareness that people can come and meet us and talk about the issues that are concerning them.
And sometimes as well you appear before Oireachtas committees, don't you? Reports and so on.
That's correct, Patrick. And in fact, Oireachtas committees are a very good way for us to get the message across to politicians who ultimately are responsible for the legislation and for making change. So we always welcome that opportunity. And in fact, this week we have two Oireachtas committees, the Oireachtas Committee on Autism and also the Oireachtas Committee on Public Petitions. The Oireachtas Committee on Autism, obviously, as its name would suggest, is focused very much on autism, and the Petitions Committee is broader and looks at all of the work we do. And we see this as very good opportunities to talk to the politicians and bring to their attention the difficulties maybe that people are encountering and any changes that we believe can be made. We also would bring any reports that we would have to the Oireachtas Committee, because ultimately if legislation needs to be changed or things need to happen, it's the Oireachtas that's going to actually make it happen.
Yeah, and the UNCRPD, there's a kind of requirement for public bodies to try to live up to the principles laid down by that, isn't there?
There are, and I'm not sure maybe that bodies are familiar with that convention themselves, and they need to really make themselves familiar with it. But actually, if they did all of the things that you've been talking about and asking me about earlier, around access, around putting the person at the centre of the services, and that they will actually meet their requirements, but they should familiarise themselves with the UN Convention and make sure that they're also meeting their public sector duty in terms of human rights, because again, all public bodies are expected to treat people in accordance with human rights and human dignity, and these are very important. And again, sometimes there's mystique around these things, but in fact there's not. It is actually about treating people the way you would want your own mother or father, your own son or daughter, your own brother or sister, or indeed yourself, to be treated when you're trying to access a service and when you're interacting with a public body.
I think we're kind of coming to the end. Is there anything my colleague here would like to ask a question, John? Yeah.
Sure.
I was just interested in what may be the statistics behind complaints. What, for example, what kind of percentage of claims are deemed valid, and of the valid ones, how many come to a successful conclusion?
Okay. So if we take 2021, because we're still compiling our statistics for last year, although it was similar, we would have received a record 4,000 complaints, so just over 4,004 complaints we received, and so that was a 17% increase on the previous year. And of those, we would have dealt with 3,961. So we dealt with almost as many in the year as we actually received, and that's where we want to be. We want to be trying to keep ahead and deal with those. In terms of the second part of your question, we would have, well, just to give you a stat on how quickly we deal with complaints, about 75% of those complaints were actually dealt with in 3 months or less, which is what we aim to do, to get through them as quick as we can. Then in terms of upheld, we would have had 22% upheld, 25% were not upheld, and then 53% we would have provided assistance. Now, sometimes that it's not all about the upheld, because the ones where we provide assistance usually means that we got what it was the person wanted. I mentioned that we try to do things informally at the beginning. So basically, if we can get the service or the outcome that the person is looking for without going through a full investigation, that's our main objective. And the vast majority of complaints are actually dealt with and closed in that manner. But then, as I mentioned, some do go to an investigation where we would uphold them and make a recommendation to the public body concerned.
Great, thanks.
So I suppose you'd be kind of striving for a kind of an agreement between the two parties rather than any kind of confrontation, if that can be avoided at all, yeah?
Exactly. We want to make it as easy as we can, particularly for the complainant, but for both bodies, and also to make sure that there's learning for the public body, and that whatever comes out of the particular complaint, that they would then apply it to others as well.
Oh, yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, just to say to people that, we have a very broad function across, a lot of public bodies. So if people are in doubt, please give us a call or an email or contact us whatever way they want to. Don't be afraid to contact us. Don't be trying to figure out whether we can deal with it or not. We'll listen to what the person has, their concerns, and we'll if we can deal with it, we'll deal with it. But in fact, we end up signposting about 800 people each year to other bodies as well. So we will signpost people somewhere else if that's the appropriate place to deal with it.
Very good. Yeah. Well, thanks very much, Ombudsman, for coming on the programme.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you.